Can you tell me a little bit about you and a little bit about where you work?
My name is Vivienne Munro. I work at the AIDS Council of New South Wales in the women's team. I've been working here for the last 5 years, well, nearly 6 years now.
And how did you come to work within ACON? Did you make a choice to work here?
Well, I'd started off using ACON to help develop a newsletter for HIV positive women, and so I was using the resources, and then I filled in for a woman who was on holiday, and I just sort of became involved in the projects that was happening, and then I relieved for another person and decided that I wanted to work here. I was sort of doing a lot of work for positive women in New South Wales, and also nationally. There was a conference on at the time, and my partner wanted me to get rid of all my papers at home and have them put them somewhere else. So I thought if I had an office, I'd put them all. I'd have a bit more space at home. So.
Was it a little bit about getting paid for what you were already doing?
That too, yes. Because I think by the end of it, I'd sort of been relieving and volunteering for about a year or 2 years before I started being paid.
So what year was this that you started?
That was the women's support group started in 87, so 91 I think I started working here full time.
It's a long time. So what do you do day to day in your job?
At the moment I'm working in the women's peer support, which is providing education, information to positive women, assisting women in meeting each other and networking, advocacy for women around service provision, and one-to-one support, visiting women in hospital, visiting them in their home, things like that.
We were talking a little bit before about factors for or ways in which well-being and feelings of well-being can be achieved, and the importance of peer support in that. Could you tell me a little bit about the reasons why you find peer support is so good? Yeah.
Well, for me, I mean, I was diagnosed in 1985, and I knew other people that were HIV positive, gay men only. My son was born the week before I was diagnosed, and the information that I had access to was through the television, newspapers, through gay men. We talked about treatments, things like that. And it wasn't until nearly 3 years after he was born and I was diagnosed that I met other women who were positive, and I talked, like sharing my experiences with them around telling family, telling children, and issues that had to do with me being as a woman, that it gave me some sort of identity. I guess I felt really dirty, unclean, really uncertain about my future, uneducated about HIV. So by meeting other women and sharing their experiences, it assisted me in realising that I was normal, that I was okay, and that I had a right to a life, to being a parent, that I had a right to my sexuality, my femininity, and so through that, through meeting other women, it gave me sort of like a pathway to be able to find out about treatments, to visit the doctor even, to feel it was okay to tell my doctor that I was positive, and to go regularly, things like that. So it's sort of changed my whole access to health provision, access to education, support, I've been able to, tell my family. And I mean, I may have done that without meeting other women, but it certainly gave me some sort of sounding board of, how not to do it, how to do it, that sort of thing. So by, being able to tell my family, then I have their support as well. And so it's certainly changed. And I think for me, in those days, there wasn't, in 1985, there wasn't a lot of information, particularly for women. There was a lot of misinformation, a lot of uncertainty. Now I think it's much easier to be able to be informed a lot more quickly after a diagnosis. There's sort of mechanisms that are set in place, and not everyone actually gets pre and post test counselling or gets referred to a support group or gets given the book or the information that's available. But those women that do, it's there for them. When I was diagnosed, there wasn't a support group, there wasn't any information, there wasn't anywhere specialist services for women or families. So I think it took me a lot longer to go through the process of acceptance and disclosure and getting on with my life than it does for women now. So I guess it was even more crucial then, because of the isolation.
So in 85 you were told by the medical profession. Did they offer any support or reference to anywhere? Or?
Well, there wasn't really anywhere. I can't remember how I was told. My partner had been diagnosed, and so they sort of rushed the test through because he'd been really sick a couple of years previous to that, and they'd tested him for glandular fever, hepatitis, a million other things. And then he came well, and they still didn't find out what it was. And then when I was pregnant, we had been living on a boat in Hawkesbury, so we moved into the city, got in touch with all our old friends and realised it was like a seroconversion illness, and so he had a test, and so they rushed my test through. And at that point, I knew pretty much that I was positive. It was AIDS in those days. I don't know. I don't even remember how I was told. I was referred to the paediatric unit for testing for my child to see if he was positive or not. But in terms of support for me, there wasn't anything, or there wasn't anything that I was referred to then. And later on, I'd sort of heard about the AIDS Council, but I thought it was something that wasn't for me anyway, or for women.
So did you find that the concern was for your child and for your family rather than you?
Well,
at that time?
For my son,
Yeah.
They tested him every 3 months until he was 18 months old. He's negative. He could have been positive. In those days, they didn't really know. It was a 50-50 chance that he could have been positive. But that was then. Now it's quite low, much lower than that, 8% or less.
How has it affected you, the radical and changes in information and treatment and making choices when information has been changing so much? It seems like a job to kind of keep up with all the information.
It's, I guess, keeping up with the information, particularly around treatments. At first, I used to be really obsessed, and it was knowledge equals power, and I would read everything and check out every new drug trial and find out how many percentage of people had this particular side effect, and whether women had been accessed that trial and women specific information had been collected. And but now, I guess that in those days there wasn't a lot. It was easy to keep on top of all the new things because there wasn't a lot, and there wasn't a lot of research on women. there still isn't enough women, with HIV. There isn't enough clinical research anyway. But there's still certainly a lot more than there was, and so it's really difficult to keep on top of things and to keep on track. And I guess what I do personally is continue to monitor my health and make sure that any treatment that's specific or relevant to me, that I read up about it and and try and forearm myself in terms of new things coming on board, or if there's anything that comes up in my work, if I'm questioned. We have a treatments officer here now, which is really good, because it means that it's sort of taken the onus off me in some ways. And I think for women, initially, it was accessing information and being able to interpret that stuff. Like this friend of mine said, you aren't given a degree in epidemiology when you get your diagnosis, and women have sort of been I used to think about 5 years behind, say, the gay community in terms of philosophy and acceptance of treatments and everything, because of the delay in getting the information and also being able to interpret it so you can understand what it means. A lot of the stuff comes out in really highly technical language, but now that there's much more of a clear guidelines around when to start treatments with viral load testing, it seems to have given people in general a much sort of clear marker. It's a very clear marker, and so from my observations anyway, women have come in and they know all about the viral load test, and it doesn't seem to be as complicated as the CD cells and the whole sort of other side of the immune system and the functioning of the immune system. So in some ways it's really worked to bring women, up to this sort of level of information and education where they feel that they have some power around the decision making and the monitoring and treatment.
I suppose the question is, where do you place HIV within your thoughts about your life? I suppose it's a question about self-identity and the importance that you place on it.
The importance of HIV in my life really over the years, it's been 12 years since I was diagnosed, and so it's obviously changed over that time. Initially, it was right in my face the whole time. That was it. I had AIDS and I was going to die. And then I realised that I wasn't going to die and that I needed to do something with my life and to stop waiting to die. But even then, in the back of my mind, I was going to get sick. So it made it difficult to plan. But I remember planning for a year ahead, and that was a really major event for me, to think of something that I wanted to do and work towards doing something that was a year ahead in my life rather than a daily or a weekly plan. And then once I started making those plans and becoming involved with other women and meeting women with HIV and becoming sort of more active and accessing information, and then I had told some of my family there was a conference happening, and it was the first National Positive Women's Conference, and a woman got up and she said, HIV is 90 or 80% of my life. And I thought, wow, how much of it is my life? Oh, it must be about 40% or 50%. And then So I realised that it wasn't sort of, I had put it back into the background and felt that it had more of a realistic place. And now that with treatments, I'm on treatments, I've been taking drugs now for about a year. My viral load is undetectable, my T cells are pretty okay, and even though I work within, work in an AIDS organisation, for me personally, I really acknowledge or realise that I've got HIV. I take pills twice a day, but I don't sort of take them and it reinforces, oh God, I've got HIV. It's just something that I do. At one point, I think because I was working in HIV and I had a lot of my friends were dying, my children were the only people in my life basically that didn't know I had the virus. They were my little AIDS-free space, and I think it had actually got to a point where HIV was 80% of my life, and that 10% was them. And then after their father died, and they, I disclosed our status to them, then I don't know, it seemed to, I guess my health and my outlook on life changed, and now it's sort of become, I don't know, it's a very small part. I mean, I don't think about it much, really.
And this question then is I suppose, about how it changed you in the past, but how have you felt that acquiring HIV and having it has changed your perspective on life and spirituality, and whether it's made any major change or it's not so much there now?
I think for a while it's made me less tolerant of people that don't go out and get what they want and work towards what they want, and it's made me impatient. But at the same time, I feel like more tolerant of other things in terms of I understand what stress is, and I think I'm not going to lose T cells over this, and so I weigh up how important things are to me, and I think I can very quickly see what's important to me and invest in whatever that is, or say, okay, this isn't important to me. I can let that go. I can forget about this, or not get worried about, or concerned, or not invest my time in this. So I think I tend to be very selective about my time, my friendships, and I think much more clear cut about things than I used to be. A lot less, accepting, as I said, about people that waste my time. I suppose that sounds really rude, but I used to be, my door would be open 24 hours a day. People could ring me any time and I'd be, the big mother, which I'm not prepared to do now.
Yeah. You're the representative for the ICW, which is the International Community for Women. How has being involved in going overseas and things like that, how's that been for you?
The International Community of Women Living with HIV and AIDS is an organisation or community of women that was established in Amsterdam because of the lack of recognition of women with HIV and the lack of support for fighting for getting women on the agenda, HIV positive women on the agenda. And so there's ICW is broken up into 5 regions, the same as the World Health Organization globally, and within each of those regions there's 3 key contacts that are elected every second year. So I've been on the board of ICW since '91. When I first went, I heard about the organisation when it was first formed in Amsterdam. They have like 12 statements that were delivered to the international conference there that year, and I read those statements and I just thought I want to be involved in this organisation. I submitted for funding, like everywhere, to go to the next international conference, and I didn't get any money from anyone. We ended up selling raffle tickets and putting on parties and everything, and I got there, and there were 50 women then from all over the world, and it was just amazing for me to come back to Australia feeling so privileged in terms of access to healthcare, housing, social security, to meet women from Latvia that was lucky to get an Aspro, and that even the doctors that treated her were isolated down the back of the hospital. None of the other doctors would speak to the doctors that saw the people with HIV. Women from Africa that met under a tree, and they had a sewing machine that they used to sew things to make money to support their meetings, and when one of them died they had to sell a sewing machine to bury her. And so listening to other women's stories gave me a different vision on what my life was and what my life meant, and what I could do for some of those women. So since then I've travelled to a lot of places, mostly within the Asia Pacific region, talking at conferences and meetings to assist healthcare providers to understand the issues that are relevant to women with HIV, to sensitise them around confidentiality and the discrimination. And I go to meet the Council of Churches in Fiji and say, I'm speaking to you now, and maybe in a year's time there will be a woman from Fiji that can do this. And at the same time I'll speak on television there and to the radio and what have you, so just to raise the awareness. I did that in Thailand. I spoke at the opening conference of the 3rd International Regional Conference and on HIV and AIDS, and said there should be a woman from Thailand here, why do they have to get me, sort of thing. And last year they had the same conference, but it was in Manila this time, and there was a woman from Manila. So it was fantastic. It's sort of like assisting and raising the awareness so that women from those countries that aren't quite as ahead of things and that don't have laws around vilification and discrimination like we do here, to be able to speak out.
How do you think that the experiences of women living with HIV, if they do, reflect or highlight experiences of women as a whole? So I suppose I'm asking, does the experience of say a woman who's living within a culture that prohibits uses of condoms within marriages and things like that, whether that I'm lost in the question, whether it just reflects anything.
I think quality, depending on different cultures can also, obviously, depending on where a woman comes from and the culture that she comes from, is obviously going to impact on how the course of the virus in their life, how their quality of life is going to be with it. The socio-economic situation of women globally, the fact that women have a second-rate position in terms of negotiating safe sex It doesn't matter what country you come from or what culture you come from. That's the sort of like those sort of things are universal. They may be more difficult and more intense in one culture than in another. Women may not be as assertive or as much in control, in one culture or another. But I guess the bottom line, those issues are there. They're really similar. Women with HIV, the issues for them globally are really similar, but they impact more in some ways than others, depending on the cultural situation. And and also the epidemiology too. Say in Australia, the epidemiology, gay men are the most affected here. So therefore it's, well, women don't get HIV, and there's a real difficulty around accessing services and having services that are appropriate and accessible for women with HIV. Whereas now in Africa and Thailand and other countries where it's mostly heterosexually acquired, the services are different. They're set up, they're more family orientated. There's orphanages, there's services for children. But some are, the issues around discrimination, disclosure, access to information, treatments, they're really similar.
Mm. Yeah. So there is still, to your mind, very much a lack of representation, a lack of visibility for positive women in Australia.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. There's within the HIV and AIDS national strategy, there's a strategy around education, care and prevention for gay men. There's a strategy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. It's sort of like a jump from gay men to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and women have fallen through the gap. And it's something I've always said, statistically, what's the critical number? How many of us have to be infected before we become statistically significant? I'm not sure what that number is.
It's at the moment the statistic is that women form 10%. Is that right, of new acquisitions of
probably
HIV?
Something like that. Yeah. They've always been, the numbers of women have always been, they say in Australia that the numbers of infection have plateaued, but that's among gay men. Within that, women have always, the figures have always been increasing.
Do you want to just have some coffee? Yeah. That's great. All my questions have naturally flowed into what you've been saying, which would be obvious, of course, that would happen. I suppose my only remaining questions are really the questions about really just about how you ended up deciding how to deal with being, and whether you get support as a parent, whether there's access for parents within HIV/AIDS organisations for support, how you decided to go about telling your children, and when you did that, and whether you had support in doing that.
I guess it's been a really difficult, the whole position that I've been within, working within ACON, I was striving to have women with HIV recognised, to have our issues acknowledged and at the same time have my children not know about my status. It's been a real double-edged sword. For the first, they've known now for 5 years, but the first 7 years they didn't know, and I wanted to be able to stand up and be counted, and I haven't really been able to, or I've had to do that really selectively. And even then, when I did tell my kids, the first thing after I told them was that I told their headmaster at their primary school, and the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, well, don't tell any of the other kids, they can be really awful in the playground." And that was one of the reasons that I had not told them in the first place, because I wanted them to understand about secrets, that some things that they could share, some things they didn't have to share, some things were their own. I wanted them to understand about HIV, how you couldn't get it, and they learnt all those things. They had friends that had that were of mine that they'd seen. They had like Uncle Gregoire that had died of HIV, and they'd attended his funeral. They'd been to candlelight rally, to the quilt unfolding. They'd helped him unfolding the quilt. So they were part of the community and part of the HIV culture. They knew that I worked here. They knew everything about it. They knew about, why some people discriminated against you. So they had a huge education in HIV. So by the time I told them, it was sort of no surprise, I guess. And the issue was that their father was dying, not that, that we had HIV or AIDS. But at the same time, I had wanted to tell them earlier, but I was afraid that they would be given a hard time in the playground. They would be having to live with the uncertainty that I'd lived with, and the fear of my dying, and so they had 7 years of not having to have that. I think by the time I told them I think I'd left it a bit too long. There was I had this feeling that especially my older daughter, that there was a piece of the jigsaw missing every time we talked, and that once she knew, we'd become real allies. But there was a a trust, because there'd been this gap there. I had to, reach out, and it didn't instantly, bridge that gap by telling her. I had to really reach out and work on closing that gap again with her. And then when I did start doing things, I'd have to say, look, I'm going to do an interview in a magazine, or I'm going to, do this, and is it okay? Or to warn them so that if anything happened at school, they'd know, that it, that it had been there. So as it turns out, nothing really horrible's happened to them. But I guess I wanted to protect them, and I still do. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life, is tell them about our status. And at the moment I'm working with an African woman who's been doing research into disclosing to children, and we're going to do a book together and work out, do this workshop in Vancouver and in Geneva if we get the money, because the fear of telling them, the fear of their reaction, are they going to be angry? Are they going to hate me? Are they going to blame me? All those things had, really put me off telling them, and I wanted to. When their father was well, it was like, okay, let's do it now. And when he was, while he can be there and help grieve with them, and then he'd get sick, and every time, it was years, and we'd go and see a child psychiatrist, and he'd say, oh yes, they're fine, bring them in next week and we'll tell them. And there was no book, there was no rules, there was no one else that I knew that had told their children. So there wasn't anywhere that I wanted someone to tell me how to do it, to tell me what they were going to feel, how they were going to react, give me the words. And there wasn't anything, there wasn't anywhere I could go. And even the child psychiatrist that we went to see, he was trying to find some book that he could read because he hadn't had any experience. So it was paving the way. And so, I'd really like to be able to write that book or help make that book so that other parents don't have to do the soul searching, that we did. It took years and years to pluck up the courage, to do it. And to be able to assist in giving someone some guidance and having other stories, to read. And so.
That's great. It sounds to me as though you personally find a great deal of benefit or maybe motivation for yourself in passing on the knowledge and the paving of the ground that you've had to do. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, in those early days of real isolation and the discrimination that I faced by, mostly by healthcare workers, I wouldn't want anyone to go through that. And like we talked about earlier, there wasn't a support group, there wasn't a book, there wasn't a video, there wasn't information. And I mean, I've been a part of, and it took me 3-4 years to be able to tell my family and friends, and it took 7 years to be able to tell my children. Other women that I've met, they've been given their diagnosis, and they've watched the video, read the book, told their family and friends, and they're on the stage at an international conference, like it's taken 3 months, and I've known that I've been part of assisting that process for them, because in those days it was like not only having our needs met, but having to know what our needs were, because we didn't even know what we needed. So to be able to say, well, these are the things that we need, and then to assist in getting those happening, and to be able to provide that to other women so that they don't have to go through the agony and the isolation that that I went through. It's really important to be able to, for me to, to be able to assist that process.
You were telling me earlier the phrase about activists are the ones that live the longest.
Oh yes, that's right. I don't know how to say that now.
But reasons for getting up in the morning. That you were at a conference and you all maybe talked about that.
That's right. The women that didn't get up for their children got up for their work. And there were, I think, 50 women in that room, and out of the women that did work, they all worked in HIV, and they said they got up for their work. And I guess for people that have been around a long time, that have been infected for a long time, as that's, in the early days it was, knowledge equals power. I guess, activism equals, longevity. And I don't know, that's what they think. Certainly has helped me get up in the morning. Yeah. So there's testing. Women newly diagnosed. Women in HIV with symptoms. It talks about the symptoms that women get specifically, as opposed to general symptoms. Women in HIV, treatments that are specific to women, pregnancy, and parenting. And at the moment, these were done with in conjunction with family planning, and we're looking at doing another set of sheets around issues like disclosing our status, disclosing to children, sexuality. So we're just trying to work out at the moment which are the most priorities for the next 6